Je suis Francesco Garutti, conservateur architecture contemporaine ici au CCA, et je suis très heureux de pouvoir introduire cette conversation ce soir avec les protagonistes de l'exposition ăᓏᕐᕋ무ᑦ, Ruovttu Guvlui versus Soi towards Som, à la fin d'une longue journée de conversation. And I think it's still important to restate now in the theater of the CCA on this stage that the CCA is in the process of developing a long-term and in-depth land acknowledgement in collaboration with the members of the Gena-Gehaga nation. And we also recognize the many nations who are the original inhabitants and caretakers of these lands and waters, which is now home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. The CCA is a settler institution, and we are working towards fostering affirmative relationships with Indigenous and other peoples across Georgia, Gay, Munyang, Montreal. The first phase of this project was released in February 2022, stemmed from the CCA creation of a biennial fellowship for Indigenous researchers working on land restitution in the Georgia, Munyang, Montreal that will inform and keep alive the land acknowledgement process. So overall, the CCA is committed to creating a living land acknowledgement that will revisit through listening and learning. Our ambition is to provide long-term support and resources to Indigenous communities and researchers. So today we have been experiencing and going through several moments, introducing the opening of this new exhibition project. We started with a reflection on the role of Indigenous emerging space making practices with the presentation of the traveling workshop, Future Casting. We explored the exhibition with the curators and with all the artists, and we welcomed everyone at the entrance of the institution with the lit of the Kulik. And again, I also would love to thank again Avi and Sylvia for sharing their singing with us. It has been amazing. Now I'll just very briefly introduce you the team and activate a discussion among all the authors who contributed to this long project. Some of them you already met through this day and across the galleries. But I think it's for who is just joining now, I think this conversation in the theater is important to kind of to do. So starting maybe with the team of the co-curators, so Takle Patridge, director of the Nordic Lab at the Soul Gallery in Ottawa, Jocelyn Pirainen, associate curator of the Inuit Art Winnipeg Gallery in Winnipeg, Ruovttu Guvlui, associate director of research and the CCA, and then ăᓏᕐᕋ무þ, who is not with us now, architect and artist, has been part of the co-curatorial team. It's just been kind of installing with us the piece, and then he left. But it's kind of a contribution, it's kind of will be part in any case of this conversation when we'll talk about his gallery. And then of course all the artists, the architects, the curators and the researchers who worked on the show, starting from Asinayak, visual artist, filmmaker and writer, Ella De Nelson, here beside me, curatorial assistant at the CCA, Geronimo Inutik, video artist, musician, Nicole Luke, architect and Inuit Future Fellow at the CCA and co-curator with Ella of the Future Casting Workshop, Tiffany Shaw, architect and exhibition designer of the project since its early conception, and Lakalo Williamson Batory, performance artist, poet and writer. And then I kind of finally add my thanks to Raphael Doden and Anouk Penel from Studio Feed, who designed the communication and the graphic design of the exhibition. This is it. I think I introduced you all. And now maybe I leave the word to Rafiko or to Takalic, I don't know, to start kind of thinking about this project and reflecting together about it.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, it's been a really interesting, sometimes intense experience working on this exhibition. I'm really, really thankful to the artists for their hard work, for the contributions in bringing this exhibition together. And I think for me it's really exciting to see all these Indigenous voices, all these Indigenous people in this kind of space that we haven't necessarily been in before. And I've had this experience in other institutions, but it's always really special to see it happen. And I hope that it can represent the start of a sustained change as far as making these kind of spaces more welcoming for Indigenous artists and community members. So what I wanted to ask to anybody up here, if you have anything to say, is what does it mean to you to be part of this exhibition and to see this exhibition presented here?
Well, I just want to say, you know, as a co-curator, that I was very grateful to be working again with you, Takarlik, with you, Lakaluk, and also with Asinayak. This is the first time working with Tiffany, as well as Nicole, and then also the wonderful team at the CCA. So it was incredibly. It was an incredibly impactful exhibition to work on, I think, to bring all of our own voices to this exhibition. That's all I want to say for now.
I think from the outset, I tend to take things very literally. So I heard that the name of the show is ʔʔʔʔʔ, towards home. Okay, Takalik, you have to come to my home then. And it just made perfect sense that you need to come to one of your homes where you had lived as a child and to work with me on a project together. And it made sense to actually spend time in a home, in an artist's home, to think and to collaborate and to create the work that we have done together. And I come from extreme privilege as a person who owns my own home in ʔʔʔʔ. Extremely privileged to have my own home. Whereas most of Nunavut, the average income in Nunavut is $20,000 a year. And 70% of all preschool children experience food insufficiency. So talking about towards home and spending time in home, it was extremely important for me to be able to talk about how home is taken away from so many people in their own homeland.
Okay, I have so many things to say that I could add to that conversation because that is why I became an architect. I never felt that places were reflecting my family, and I wanted to make an impact in that way. And I remember when I was 5, my mother drove me past Douglas Cardinal's building, St. Albert Place. I'm from Edmonton, Alberta, and my family is Métis. And I knew that it looked so different from the environment that I was around in Edmonton, and it looked so extraordinary. And I knew that I wanted to be a part of that place. I wanted to imagine new futures, and I saw myself in that. And so that's why I became an architect, is to see myself in these spaces with my family. And I think that architecture really misses the mark on who they're serving. And I think the conversation of the North is, I go to these RAC conferences to see how people are trying to figure out how to figure out Inuit housing. And it's like they don't understand the culture. They look at it from a very, like a plan. They look at the plan, they look at the assemblies, they look at the details, and then they'll say things like, there's too many BTUs in this space. There's too much expiration of breath because it's overcrowded. Or talking about the assemblies of the corners, how these things come together with these SIP panels. And then they'll say funny things like, I mean, this will be on reserve, so it's a little bit farther, so they'll say, but then we put windows in them, but then they cover them up and we don't know why. And so there's just like this lack of, there's a curiosity, but not a conversation on how to understand it and go further. And so exhibitions like this are very meaningful to me because I think it really starts to look at it from a voice that is often not allowed to have space. And I've shared this a few times, but when I went to this school called SCIARC, it's called Southern California Institute of Architecture, I loved the experience there, and I learned about the CCA there, and I felt like that was a next logical step for me when I go back to Canada, is to work with the CCA in some way, because they seemed innovative and exciting. And when I finally did come here, I was working on a public art project, which I did not get, but Nadia Meyer got, because she's amazing. I came here to do some research, and I emailed in advance, because I love looking at the collections. I used it quite often during my research. But there's no Indigenous records. There's nothing about anything Indigenous at all. And that is when I felt like the CCA is dead to me. Because it didn't represent my family, it didn't represent me, it didn't represent where I was going. And then it meant to me that the CCA was like the past. For me, to be honest. Because I'm not here to talk about corners. I'm not here to talk about vestibules. I'm here to talk about what is the feeling when you come into the building to make you feel safe, fed, clothed, because that is the thing that my family deals with on a daily level, and I know that I am not alone. And so when the CCA asked me, I didn't know that they knew I was alive. I was like shocked. And I was like, oh, sure, I would, because of the people that were part of this is why I wanted to be part of it. Because it wasn't just coming from the CCA, it was the collaborators that I wanted to be a part of. The work that you all do is progressive and beautiful and innovative and architectural. And so I was grateful to just be invited into the process. But that is what this moment for me is about. It is about new dialogues and new futures, and I'm excited because people like ʔʔʔʔʔ are the future, and I'm here for that.
Everyone's looking at me now. Thank you, that was really powerful. I think over this whole process and journey, it's just been really amazing getting to know everyone, and all these opportunities just in front of me, and being able to extend that through future casting is just an amazing experience that I hope, and I think it will cause a lot of ripple effect within all the future casting members' communities and the work that they do. I think it's very much a privilege for me to be excited about all the future work that I can't wait to enjoy and even go through hardship and be stressed about, because I think it's all very exciting. And I don't think many Indigenous people have that type of opportunity to be excited about, and I think that's what Towards Home is, and it creates that environment to understand more on a personal level, but also makes people aware that we all deserve a home, we all deserve to feel safe, and look forward to many opportunities and our own types of development. So even throughout my master's in architecture, the concept of sovereignty and Arctic architecture is really important, and I think over the next 10, 15 years and beyond is going to be very critical in the inclusion of Indigenous communities and how they are creating sovereignty within their own communities as well. So I can go on forever about this, but I just am very thankful, and I think it's been a very wonderful experience with you all.
I was really happy to be invited here and to be in this project, and specifically to be invited to work with an architect to imagine space. And I'm like definitely a very curious person and very inspired by lots of things, and one of those things is architecture. And I think like that's what's really special about being invited in this space specifically, and being able to work with Tiffany on a project, is that like I think that so many of us can be so curious and inspired by lots of things in the world, but never get the opportunity to explore in it. And so that's what I'm grateful for, and was special about being here, was to be able to explore in something that would have been difficult otherwise.
Faire de l'art, c'est quelque chose que je fais, que je sois professionnel ou non. Ma communauté, ça inclut toutes sortes de classes, toutes sortes d'ethnies, toutes sortes de cultures. Et c'est toujours complexe pour moi de faire un travail de politique identitaire dans des contextes institutionnels, quand je viens pas nécessairement je viens d'un autre spectre, du spectre opposé, dans le privilège d'avoir une maison. J'ai vécu en itinérance dans une instance de ma vie. Des membres de ma communauté que j'ai passé en entrevue, certains d'eux, ils font de la sculpture dans la rue. Et puis, ils vendent leur sculpture pour pouvoir subvenir à des besoins de base. On essaie de se médiquer des problèmes sociaux qu'on peut vivre, qui sont plutôt complexes. Et puis, pour moi, le logement, c'est un endroit où c'est pas nécessairement toujours un endroit sécuritaire, parce que les circonstances historiques ont fait que ces constructions n'ont pas toujours été des lieux sécuritaires pour des membres de ma famille proches et moi. Ce qui a fait que j'ai vécu longtemps en marginalité. Donc, cela étant dit, c'est une merveilleuse occasion pour moi de m'exprimer créativement dans un contexte où j'ai beaucoup de support technique et académique, conceptualiser des idées alentour de mon noyau, hein, parce que moi, c'est pas mon travail de vendre l'image, mais de plutôt faire l'image. Et mon image, c'est pas c'est plutôt personnel, c'est subjectif. Hein. Ma création, c'est des caprices artistiques. Et je vois beaucoup de réflexions dans le milieu architectural, beaucoup de caprices artistiques, beaucoup d'ambitions professionnelles. Mais à la base, je cherche un sentiment épuré dans l'expression et de rejoindre une communauté. Ben, la communauté, ben, ça part de sa famille. Ben, donc, ça inclut ma génétique, ma culture, mais ça inclut tout le monde. Moi, je suis un métropolitain, un urbain. Donc, mon art, je cherche que ça soit des lieux de réflexion et des instants où on peut avoir des moments différents de la routine et de le statu quo qu'on évoque et qu'on instrumentalise pour se déployer dans ces milieux. Hein? Donc, quand j'ai été invité, là, plus de 2 ans, de la part de Takalik à participer dans une résidence artistique, j'avais carte blanche. J'ai voulu explorer cette question d'idée de diffusion communautaire, de la radio comme point de diffusion dans une communauté, dans un sentiment de chez soi, ça part dans son logement et dans le village et out on the land, comme on dit en anglais. Donc, je suis content de là être dans un milieu où c'est pas juste une œuvre singulière, mais que ça existe dans une communauté. Donc, pour moi, c'est ça, c'est que je retrouve par le moyen de l'art un sentiment de communauté que j'ai été coupé d'une certaine part, avec la violence de l'histoire personnelle que j'ai vécue, l'héritage culturel de la colonisation. C'est pas toujours égal pour tout le monde, mais ici, à travers l'expression artistique, peut-être on est tous sur la même page à quelque part. Merci.
You have to answer this question too, Sacrilege, though.
I thought I answered it by talking first.
Maybe we'll come back to you just because I have my mic on, but I want to turn it over to Ella after, but I also want to channel UR, who's not here. UR Nengo, Sámi artist and architect, and I know he wished he could be here. Oh, sorry, a little closer. And there'll actually be a conversation I had with him. It's going to be published on the CCA website this upcoming Monday. And I asked him the question, who can or who should hold land-based knowledges, particularly within the context of the practice of architecture. And I think his response, and I think it characterizes a lot of the sort of way of working within this group, was one of that there's both, you need generosity to undertake this sort of work, to share these knowledges across institutions, across individuals, across cultures in a way. But you also need to hold something back sometimes, and sometimes withholding is part of that generosity. So I think within the context and what everyone has been speaking about in expanding sort of institutional capacity to welcome in Indigenous knowledges related to architecture, I think there's a lot of work to do. And I think UR's work and his library points us to ways of learning together, of being generous, but also knowing when to listen, when to unlearn, how to engage in dialogue. And we're hoping to really activate that space as well with public programming. So I think that's a nice reminder when we end in that room and we have the sunset, Tiffany and Takralik sort of put there for us and oriented towards the west, to really think about what it means to redefine architecture, to reorient architecture, both towards the north, but also within the south and other land-based knowledge holders. And yeah, I really want to thank all of you for sharing this over the course of the project and being so generous. And yeah, also you are. Hopefully you'll see this video at some point. And yeah, we really wish you could be here with us. And I know he would want to be here. And in some ways he very much is, because he was also instrumental to the Future Casting project that Ella and Nicole led along with Gunvor Guttorm. And he'll probably be back this fall. So I think there'll be other events where we can join him then as well. Pass it over to you, Ella, for a few words.
But I guess maybe the perspective I can offer on this would be as a curatorial assistant, I think, typically when you're entering a project and you're thinking about research, often the first point of entry is through the collection and looking at research material. And I think, for me, going and working on this project was interesting because, what does it mean to go and look at a collection when you maybe don't necessarily find the voices that you're looking for represented there? And I mean, that's also just a personal question for myself. But I think when you're able to actually then build new bridges and make these kinds of conversations and actually bring in new work and able to create a platform for these voices. And actually, I think one thing that's so exciting about the Future Casting project and working on that with Nicole was seeing the way in which the students were really able to feed off one another and share ideas with each other, and really foster this space of inclusivity, but like knowledge sharing that I think for so long many of them maybe didn't necessarily always feel they had access or privilege to inside other institutions or inside the university. And so opening up that space and being able to open up those conversations, I think really led to this sort of exciting new work being developed coming from that. And I think it will only lead to more conversations, but also it means then there's this new body and repository of work that other young designers and emerging practitioners can then draw from and see themselves being represented in the future, which I think is like really what is so key and crucial to this project. And I'm just so proud to have been a part of it.
What does it mean to you to be part of this larger exhibition and project? What does it come to mean to you?
Well, it's not the first time that I've worked with co-curators, and some of them I've worked with before. But it's always I mentioned it before, but it's always surprising to me how generous people are with their time and their knowledge, and just how much I learn from other people of all ages. Actually, a couple of my colleagues from SAR here. One is Aidan Corey and one is Gail Kabluna. Aidan's much younger, and I feel like I'm learning from them. Another co-collaborator. I was just actually thinking about how much of this exhibition invites the visitor in. Like a Sydney's installation is a place you can sit in there, and you can be in there, and you want to be in there. And Geronimo's installation, same thing, and you can hear the radio. It's very interactive. So it's not very usual that you have that in any kind of exhibition, I find. So that's pretty awesome. Oh, even our room has a bench in it.
Yeah, and Corolla asks for offerings to come and be provided in the bowl as well. So
Yeah, and then also in future casting, there's a place to sit as well, right? Are we allowed to sit there?
I don't think there's a bench, but I think you can sit
Yes,
if you want.
You can sit on the benches.
We're allowed to sit on the benches with the crochet. Yeah, so there's all kinds of places to sit and just experience the things at a slower pace. And I think that's really special. I think it really goes to our idea that we wanted it to be welcoming, and I think everybody kind of just converged on that on their own without us saying, okay, we want you to do this.
I have also a question, but I think that first, if there are some kind of points or reflection, and of course from the audience, I think we will be more than any question welcome in French, English.
Come on,
Phyllis.
Heather, you know I have questions for us.
I think
There's-
while people are
there's a mic.
identifying, yeah, I'm curious about how.
A mic is coming. Oh, sorry.
So I think the CCA has never done an exhibition this way, and it's been a fantastic learning curve for everybody. And the people, I was lucky yesterday to be able to come at a time and visit the exhibition with many of you, many of the curators. And then we all went out to supper, and it was a great joy to meet all of you. I had no intention of going out. I was just still wearing my bag. I go absolutely nowhere. But it was just such a joyous occasion. And so I think that joy, that love, that compassion, and that very important way of expressing in a very simple way. I don't mean simple, a very understandable way. Well, it's very hard to be simple, but also in a very understandable way. And it's a very warm, it's a very, I think it's a wonderful exhibition. And so I want to thank you all, each one of you, the curators, the architect, the people who planned it, the person at the CCA, I'm sorry, I can't think of your name, and because I never remember anybody's name, and just all of you. It was very beautiful. You're beautiful people, and thank you, CCA, for the CCA team for doing this, for helping to connect and to establish this wonderful sense of being human. Thank you.
We have another question here, I think.
We've all spent way too much time in our homes over the last couple of years, and so I'm just thinking about this being in the context of being here in Montreal and in southern Canada, and just wondering if you could speak a little bit to what you're hoping that audiences take away from visiting the exhibition.
Well, when we were first, coming up with the idea of what this show is actually going to be about, like 2 years ago, just as the pandemic was kind of coming around and starting, and it did take us a while to get to, the themes that we were exploring, and I think at that point too. I think we really wanted to, express the idea of how important the land is around us, especially for those living in the north, living in around the circumpolar north, how much of a connection Indigenous folks have with the land as well, and but then also to for the future of building in the north, what can that be? That I think that was also another really important kind of question for people to come in when they are going through the exhibition space to think about how are we now going to build in the north for folks.
I think that we made a space that has lots of ideas in it, and that the space is there to help prompt people to think for themselves what home is, right? And I think, like, in my work, I thought a lot about what home meant to me, what makes my home, and how it's made. And then in my life, as I'm going about my life, I have valuable information that helps me be a human and to help me get what I need to feel comfortable and feel safe. And I think that's what I would hope for everyone coming to the exhibition, to take time to reflect and find out what that means individually for themselves.
I grew up in the 1980s, and one of the biggest movies as a child was The Never-Ending Story. And you know the part where there's this skinny little white man in shining armor, and he comes up and there's these two giant oracles, and his heart is quivering, and he doesn't know if he's going to be able to pass into the other realm, and he gets zapped by these two large-breasted women who have the truth in their eyes. And then, of course, a trio gets through, and is jokingly calling ourselves oracles. But at the same time, in all seriousness, I really wanted for people to take away the idea that Takalik and I are women in our 40s, and we have been homes. We have carried so many lives inside ourselves and created homes for all our children. And as Inuit women, the way that we look, the way that we sound, the way that we conduct ourselves is very much appreciated and needed by everybody. We are a hearth, and our looks are sought for. So aesthetically, that is what I really wanted for people to take in, that we are ourselves as 40-something-year-old women. And then the content of the material we're dealing with ourselves. I wanted to create a situation where Takalik and I were in conversation with each other, where I'm bearing witness to what she has to say, and she's bearing witness to what I have to say. And that idea of bearing witness being as much institutionalization as we can muster as Inuit artists that don't necessarily have a home in our homeland. But that bearing witness to one another is also a way of inviting visitors to sit there and think their own thoughts while they take in the stories that we're telling them. I want people to feel welcome to be themselves as they think and watch each of us interact with one another. I can only talk about what I've contributed.
My work is always about questions, so whether it's curatorial work or writing or art, I always go towards questions that I have and try to examine them, and I don't necessarily know what the answers are, and I want to raise questions in other people's minds. So if we're talking about colonization, or if we're talking about, I've written work about the reaction that Indigenous people had on social media when Colton Bushy's murderer was acquitted. And that's all questions. And we have some central questions that we settled on for this exhibition. And I'm hoping that when people see the work, that they have more questions, not only about Inuit, about Sámi, about Indigenous people in the North, but also about their place in this this system that we all live in. So, like, Alia, who was speaking from the city before, she had kind of an interesting point about that. Like, she's questioning about her place as an immigrant who's a francophone in Montreal, and how does she fit in? And I don't necessarily think that we all can just come up with the answers like that, but first we have to ask those questions to ourselves instead of just assuming that we know the way things are. And I think that's what kind of my MO in everything that I do. And the other thing that I want people to take away is that, Indigenous artists, architects, people, community members belong in these spaces. We're not just guests who get a lucky chance. Like, these spaces, all the resources that have gone into building the riches of this world, and the riches, especially in this country, have come from Indigenous lands. And it is correct that they should be redistributed or redeployed within Indigenous communities and towards the benefit of Indigenous peoples, among other people, but of course I'm always having Indigenous people and Inuit especially on my mind.
My question is, thank you for your work. I'm delighted to be here today. I do have a question, and that is about shedding the confines of colonialism in your architectural work. That in thinking of what makes a home, what makes a home, like when in Nunavik anyway, I don't know if they've made any 5-bedroom houses in a long time, but I do know that for Indigenous Inuktitut language retention, it's children retain their language if they're in multi-generational homes. So how does the housing that is being built enable families to live in multi-generational ways within those spaces? That's one. A second one is about, in some of our institutions, like a childcare center. In the province of Quebec, a childcare center is required to have a certain number of square feet for a baby. In the baby's bed is to be placed, and the height of the crib is to be such and such. But wait a minute, if you went into a Sinayak's structure here, you would find a kind of a surface that could serve as a bed. Could we not have a bed in the back of a daycare center where the little children can come together as they might in their families and sleep? Just for example. How do we, if we are obliged to be conforming to health and safety standards, have children coming to a tent by the river for the day? So I got nervous, I apologize, but how do we think in ways that enable us to bring in Nunangat, to work with the land, to remember that land is a lover, land is a nurturer, land is a carer, and how can we reconceptualize our notion of what it means to be home?
I helped build a daycare in Inuit that did all of that. And it comes again from naivety or taking things literally. I have a baby and I don't have a daycare. So I'm going to work with all of these women, and we're going to build a daycare. And of course, it's going to be 100% in Inuktitut. What else would we do? And of course, we're going to serve country food every day. And of course, we're going to have land programming. It's just a matter of being a bulldozer. And it takes a number. The thing is collaboration, and it takes community to be a bulldozer together. And I was involved with the daycare for 15 years. And I haven't been for 3 years. So it's the babies that first started in the daycare have just graduated high school, and everybody has graduated high school, and they all still speak Inuktitut, and they all hunt, and they all eat country food. So I know we're doing the right thing, but it's the only daycare in Iqaluit that does that. We need to have community support for so many more bulldozers to think with the same naivety that me and my fellow women had 18 years ago.
But is Indigenous services in your communities up north, the way that they are in the reserves?
Yeah, Indigenous services is there. One of the things that was very difficult when we started the daycare was that our food was not certified, and so it was considered dirty. And so we just went ahead and served it anyway.
Are they funding these projects?
Say again?
Are they funding these projects?
They are now. Yeah, now our daycare is seen as like an example. And country food is served all over the place in Nunavut at daycare.
Mm-hmm. So your question is a good one because usually it's around rules, and I only work on projects like in Alberta and BC and the Yukon, and the rules are just stacked high, and there are often more people who are managing the rules than innovating the ideas. And the people that want to do something innovative are small and need to be bulldozers, but they get tired and they're fatigued. And so it really does take a village to push new ideas. A lot of the projects that I work on all of my projects are Indigenous, and a lot of them are with Indigenous services. And I have to say that I think that the people that I deal with directly do have a want and a desire to do something different. But often people don't act on the idea of what they can do versus what they can't. And the house you said for 5 people, it's very expensive to build a house more than, usually it's just 3 bedrooms if they want to build these houses. They're very costly. Usually Indigenous communities want them to be 1 floor, which is also takes up more space. Usually you want to make them skinnier and taller and get more of them together, which is also not an experience that a lot of Indigenous people don't want. And so the money that gets assigned is in a value of a urban condition rather than a rural condition. And there is a real divide about understanding how services get to these houses as well. And so there is a huge lack of understanding between infrastructure and the desire for healthy spaces for living. The hill is so big that when there are beautiful experiences like this that exist, people see it's like a glimmer of hope. But then once they're stuck into the fire of dealing with the people that don't know how to use their voice or the agency, or they get tired of always saying the thing that everyone's thinking, but by themselves, it doesn't get done, or the person with the rules doesn't care. So the reason is why these spaces are like this is because of cost and because of lack of innovation, mostly. You can usually do these things. But when we do these performas about how much we want to do these houses at this cost, it's expensive, over $500,000 for a family of 4 to 8. That is a hard thing to deal with, because then they also have to deal with driveways and the infrastructure to get there. And that's where things really start to fall apart. And then they can't do as many houses that they require because there's such a deficit of houses that require these, people need these houses. So they start to quantify the numbers, and then they want to do the work. They want to fund these things, but they can't fund it all, and they can't fund it in the way that it needs to be. So I think it's still a big question. It's like it's an easy one to ask, but to solve it, I think is also easy. But that just means there's more resources and more money, which exists. It's there. We know how to build properly, but we are not allocating it in the right ways.
I think along those lines, this is something that will be a huge giant that I want to face and really consider in my line of work and in Arctic architecture and design and fostering those safe spaces and have those housing units that are applicable for 5 or more and for larger families or multi-generational. Because it's more than just a budget and it's more than just a policy, but that's kind of what you have to work with, and you have to be try your best to be creative about those challenges, I think. And what I've always wondered is why is there's all these political borders between provinces and territories, but how does that make sense for in Quebec there's Nunavik, and then there's if you are a registered architect and you want to you design a building in Nunavik, like that's, yes, you're in the same province, but those are 2 totally different areas, and longitude, latitude, and all that for climate. And there's only the Architects Association in the Northwest Territories, but there's none in the Yukon or Nunavut. And I'm just wondering, why has there not been or maybe there has, and it's not fully developed yet, but these territorial overall Territorial Architects Act and combining all the Inuit, all the Inuit regions as well, because designing in Northwest Territories, even in the south part of Northwest Territories to the very north, it's not the same. But if all of the if you're thinking on a map, if they're all within the same northern region, they're not necessarily the same process, but you still have to ship up all these materials, and you have to go through all these, jump through all these hoops that I think there can be a lot of lessons learned and combined, rather than just having a Canadian architect sign up and design a building in the Arctic, because that's kind of the requirements. You just have to be a Canadian architect in whatever province. So I think there's a lot of things that are lost in translation, which happens in all projects, I think, to some degree. But I think the things can be more fine-tuned, and there's a lot of work to do, but I don't know, that's what I have to say.
Yeah, procurement is another thing about that too, making sure that the funding goes in the communities as well. So actually the Northwest Territories has a pretty good idea around procurement. You have to prove that an X number of percentage goes towards the communities where they're building the houses. So they sort of like have some really good infrastructure, but it's not really hitting home on the final product of the ideas. And so when Nicole's sort of hinting at the regulation, each jurisdiction that you're in has different codes and as well, and so those are also barriers too for these spaces. So she's touching on some really important piece around regulatory work, which takes years, decades to kind of infiltrate, and they are these invisible barriers, the policies and the procedures that limit us and have our autonomy to move in these spaces.
And maybe the one thing I would add is that, I mean, listening to Tiffany and Nicole, I mean, I'd maybe characterize the two of you as rule breakers in some ways, and I think architects are rule followers in many ways. And schools of architecture aren't very radical spaces, if there are any students here. I think a lot of you know that. And so I think, maybe going back to your question, Heather, you know, what people will take out of this is, I think, especially through the future casting project that Nicole and Ella are leading, and obviously your voice in the show, Tiffany, is, I think, to bring in students, hopefully many Indigenous design students, not only into the profession, but coming through the show and seeing ways of questioning the practice of architecture in what's now Canada, but also elsewhere across the north. And I think, it's these forms of advocacy and really question asking, not taking the status quo for what it is I think, really powerful what you two of you are putting forward.
The way I see it is that there's a lot of disconnect between 4 different realms in terms of providing adequate, safe, and ample housing, at least in Nunavut. There's a disconnect between the people who are decision makers, politicians, with policymakers. There's a disconnect between these two and academia, and then there's also a disconnect between big business. Construction companies like SNC Lavalin, and how they are the ones that are bringing all the construction equipment, our material at least a year or 2 years before it starts to get built. All those four realms, the decision makers, policy, the academia, and the big business need to be coordinated in a way that actually focuses on Inuit having safe homes.
I'm sorry, there's a non-disclosure agreement.
Oops.
I think you should explain the non-disclosure agreement. I'm sorry. It's a very good thought that I did not know about, actually, which really gives you a highlight as to what we're talking. I think it would be good for you to talk about that NDA. Like why you said that. I think that is new to me.
Why did I bring that up?
Yeah.
Because every party has self-interest that they want to generate the most profit by exploiting one another the most. So no one is ready to create the utopia that will never exist in any case. We're in perpetual conflict. I'm very pessimist. I'm sorry. I'll shut up now.
There's a question there, but Asinayak, you wanted to add something, or no? Not for now.
I guess my question is, as someone who's had to move away from the Arctic for personal reasons of lack of resources, for mental health, other reasons, what do you hope to see for the future of home?
I'd like to have a home, and I'd like it to be a place where I could have a musical instrument.
Aiden, are you talking about people who live away from the north as well?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. As you know, many Inuit live away from Inuit Nunangat, and that's not going to change anytime soon. I would love to see a lot more affordable housing for Inuit in urban areas. It's very hard to find a place in Ottawa or Montreal, for example, because of racism, among other things. Racism. But the other thing other things I would love to see in the future is like access for Inuit living away from the north to Inuktitut language classes, programs, cultural things, and also much more access to being able to go up north, and also a lot more collaboration between Inuit, especially in the arts field, because that's where we work, Inuit working in the south or away from the north, with Inuit in the north, because I feel like there's an artificial divide, and it's also the same between the Inuit regions. Nicole touched on that. And it really has to do with colonial ideas of putting things into silos, and I think it's really harmful to our communities to have these kind of divides, because they don't need to be there.
I'll talk about one specific dream, about a kitchen, where you can take apart a whole animal and cut it up and make every single dish out of it and look after the skin and feed your family and have people come in to tend to the skin and sew with you and create realms of like spider webs of mental health and goodness by just having a kitchen that is culturally appropriate to us. Just one example.
Bigger porch, right?
Bigger porch. You talked about a bigger porch too.
And a new porch.
I'm going to say some words, and I'm not going to translate it, but I have to say it in Sámi language. Huiologiittoa tanchaya husa outasta no kuoskai oles mu vaimua. Ja nuolo touttoi puhti ja te kopeisa joaini hets argabiäiviä takkar aktavuoras. I'm so thankful for this exhibition. Even if it's from our everyday life, it means a lot to see it in a big city, and together with the Inuit people here, that we have a common view of the world. You can have a good, healthy life in a dwelling, small dwelling, and I hope you understand the need to be more visible, get space for show how satisfied we are with the life on the land. And I hope we get it to Sápmi. It is so important to work together, and you empower yourself also working together with other indigenous people. Ologito. And I know some of you are speaking language, even one, we maybe translate, no, understand Sámi language. Ologito, tungi mai.
Ologito.
It's a comment. Thank you for all of the work and effort that you've put into the exhibition. I really think that, like Asinayak's mom said, that it shows the humanity and the joy that we all get from the feelings of home. And I like what Lakaluk said about bulldozing through all of the barriers that we face, and things got a little bit political. But I just wanted to say thank you. The exhibition is really great, and so are you.
You know, I've been, our team have been following you, you know, during the entire process of making, constructing, thinking about this show. And I have to personally say that it has been really fascinating to see how all these questions you were talking about, Takalik, and all the points and the themes you developed since the beginning somehow inform in a very organic way the exhibition. You really see how each gallery is affecting, and the words of each of you somehow are kind of generating also works of the others, transforming the entire galleries in one space in the end. They are very different one to each other, but in the end they are one land, and you really perceive this, I have to say, going through the space. And yeah, this is, I think it's a kind of an important value that comes out from the curatorial, intellectual, and human process we have been going through together. And I also, maybe it's important to mention, I don't know, Raf and Asinayak, that the exhibition kind of also has an expansion, you know, with the festival this summer. I don't know, Asinayak, if you want to mention something about it.
This summer, for months, we're going to show films, basically films and performances in the evenings. So more information to follow.
And maybe, I guess what I would add to that is I think, Siniak, I think you want to see a lot of kids coming out to those events, right? And it was really, heartwarming to see so many kids coming out. I think actually it really engages. You know, you can hop over the river, Geronimo in your space, go hide in a Siniak space, you know, offer flowers in Corollas, don't touch anything in future casting. That's the tempting space. And then, you know, you have the oracles with looming over you. It must be huge to kids. It's incredible. And then you can just touch all the furs and skins and everything else in yours gallery. So yeah, hopefully you bring many more kids through. And yeah, I think it's a really important comment. Tiffany, thanks.
Thank you all again, and merci.